I never thought something like this would happen at our school. It was supposed to be a safe place, but that day, everything changed. I was in the bathroom when the lockdown announcement came over the intercom. The message was brief, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. There were armed shooters on school property, and we were all instructed to find a safe place and stay there until further notice. I ran into one of the bathroom stalls and locked the door, trying to control my breathing. I was hoping that no one else was in the bathroom, but I heard footsteps approaching the door. Panic set in as I saw a man pushed open the bathroom door and walk in with a weapon in hand. I could see his silhouette through the stall door, and I held my breath, praying that he wouldn't check the stalls. I heard him moving around the bathroom, his footsteps echoing off the tiles. Every sound he made was amplified, and my heart raced faster and faster. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead, and I tried to control my breathing. The shooter stopped in front of one of the sinks, and I heard him turn on the faucet. The sound of running water filled the room, and I was sure he could hear my heart beating in my chest. He moved on to the next sink, and then the next, and his footsteps drawing closer to my stall. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. And then, he was in front of my stall door. I could see his boots through the small gap between the floor and the door. He stood there for what felt like eternity, and I could hear his breathing. It was heavy and labored. I held my breath, not daring to make a sound as he rattled the door handle, but thankfully, he moved on to the next stall. The shooter continued to move from stall to stall. Finally, he reached the last stall, just a few feet away from mine. I heard him stop, and I could feel him listening, trying to hear any sound that would reveal my presence. And then, I heard my phone ringing. It was a soft, melodic sound that seemed to echo off the bathroom walls. The shooter heard it too. He turned towards my stall. I could see his silhouette through the crack in the door as he moved closer. My heart was racing and I didn't know what to do. I held my breath, not daring to make a sound as he rattled the door handle. But then, he began to bang on the door, trying to force it open. I was frozen in fear, my heart pounding in my chest as the shooter continued to bang on the door. I thought for sure he was going to break through. But then, I heard a voice outside the bathroom.
"Please drop your weapon and come out with your hands up."
The shooter stopped banging on the door, and I could hear him moving around the bathroom. A few moments later, there was a loud crash, and then everything went silent. I sat in the stall, trying to control my breathing and thinking about the situation I was just in. It felt like hours before the all clear was given, and I was finally able to leave the bathroom. The school was forever changed by that day, and so was I. I couldn't shake the feeling of terror and helplessness, or the memory of the shooter banging on the door of my stall. It was a day that I would never forget. I was working as the IT guy at a small office when the lockdown happened. I was down in the basement, working on some routine maintenance work when I heard the announcement. As I tried to access the security cameras, I realized that the network had been compromised, and I was cut off from the rest of the building. I was stuck in the electrical room, with no way to communicate with anyone. That's when I heard it, a faint shuffling noise coming from the hallway. At first I thought it might have been one of my colleagues, but the noise only grew louder, and it became clear that it was someone else. My heart was racing. I didn't have any weapons, and I was completely alone. I could hear the footsteps getting louder, and I knew I had to hide. I found a small storage room and crawled inside, trying to make as little noise as possible. I was on edge as I heard the footsteps come closer and closer, until the door was opened by a man who seemed just as scared as I was. As I sat in the storage room, waiting for the security team to arrive, I couldn't help but feel uneasy about the man who had entered the room, who I assumed was the janitor, but there was something off about him. He had a nervous smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes, and his movements were too calculated for someone who was genuinely afraid. Despite my suspicions, we started making small talk. The man introduced himself as Paul, and we talked about our work at the office. He told me about the odd jobs he had to do around the building, and I talked about the different IT issues I had to handle. But even as we chatted, my suspicions about Paul only grew. There was something about his demeanor that made me feel uneasy, like he was hiding something. I tried to ignore the feeling, chalking it up to the stress of the situation, but as we waited in the cramped storage room, I couldn't help but notice that Paul seemed to be more relaxed than I was. He even laughed at some of my jokes, which seemed odd given the circumstances, but I tried to push the feeling of suspicion to the back of my mind and focused on waiting for the security team to arrive. When the security team finally arrived and burst into the room, I was shocked to see them arrest Paul. They had identified him as the intruder they'd been looking for all along. It was a chilling realization, knowing that I had been trapped in a small space with someone who was trying to harm us. It wasn't until later that I found out the true extent of his actions. Apparently, Paul had been living in the basement of our building for months, sneaking in after hours to avoid detection. The security team had been called in after reports of missing equipment and files. During the investigation, the security team found Paul in the basement, and Paul had attacked a security guard with a knife from the office kitchen and attempted to escape. As Paul was taken away, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if the security team didn't arrive in time. The memory of that lockdown would haunt me for a long time to come, but I was grateful to have made it out alive. It was a typical Saturday afternoon when I went grocery shopping at the local supermarket. I was lost in my thoughts, making my way down the aisles and filling my cart with the items on my list. But then, I heard a blood-curdling scream. At first, I thought it was just someone having a meltdown, but as the screaming continued, I realized that something was seriously wrong. Panic set in as people started running towards the exit, screaming and knocking over displays in their rush to get out. I followed the crowd, but before I could make it to the door, a store employee grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the back of the store.
"You can't leave yet. We need to get you to a safe place,"
she said. We made our way to the back of the store, where the employees unlocked a door that led to a small storeroom. It was cramped and musty, and I could barely make out the shelves of supplies in the dim light. The employee left me alone in the storeroom, promising to come back for me as soon as she could. I sat down on a crate as I tried to make sense of what was happening. And then, I heard shuffling. It was slow and deliberate, and it seemed to be coming from just outside the door. I held my breath, hoping that whatever was out there wouldn't find me. But the shuffling stopped outside the door to the storeroom, and I heard the creak of a hinge as the door opened slightly. My stomach churned as I realized that something was trying to get in. For what felt like an eternity, I sat there in the darkness, waiting for whatever was outside to make its move. Every nerve in my body was on edge, my mind racing with thoughts of escape and survival. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the shuffling receded, and whatever was outside moved on. I breathed a sigh of relief. The memory of the fear and uncertainty stayed with me long after this incident. Days later, I heard a police report on the news about what happened at the grocery store. Apparently, there had been a disturbance caused by a group of armed robbers who had targeted the store. The police had been able to arrest the suspects, but not before they had caused chaos and terror among the shoppers and employees. As I listened to the report, I realized how lucky I had been to make it out of the store unharmed. The memory of those few minutes spent in the storeroom, waiting and hoping for a rescue, would give me nightmares to come.